Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Oxygen for the Soul. This week's Parashat is Perashat Shemini. We are in the middle of the third book of the 5 books of Moses. And this Parashat has so much to teach us about, so many lessons about life, about people, about dealing with tragedy. The Parashat begins with the completion of the tabernacle, the completion of the dedication of the Mishkan. And it tells us how on the 8th day, the dedication of the tabernacle, which Moshe had assembled all the people together, they did this for 7 days. And then at the 8th day, we hear about the 8th day. This is the consecration of this particular Mishkan. And the question is, why do I need to hear about this right now? Just tell me about the 8th day. You got to tell me about the 7 days leading up to it. Like the practice run, you don't hear about like the practice run. Just tell me exactly what I need to do to get to the end. I want to see the story. I want to see the play. I want to see the end of the completion of the work. Don't tell me about all the practice runs. I don't care about the practice runs. So I think the Parashat is teaching us a very important lesson, and that lesson is that in Judaism it's always about the destination and not just the journey. So we mentioned the journey because it's part of the process, but it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. We said the other way around. Meaning we all think that we're all stuck in a world where everything I do is being measured, everything I do is so tangible, and I measure my success based on my ability to produce X, Y, and Z. But Parashat tells us that, you know what? We learned all about the destination at the end, but it took us 7 days of preparation to get to the end. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Pesach is less than 2 weeks away. It's coming up very quickly. And the Chachamim tell us that, in between, the whole purpose of this time, you're supposed to start 30 days before a holiday to prepare for the holiday. And you could ask, why so much preparation into one night? It's a few hours at the Seder, a few hours at the table. You can spend a month preparing. The answer is yeah. The more you prepare, the more meaningful that day will be. The more you're able to put in effort into the actual Seder. The more you're able to put effort into time into preparing for anything, that's where the meaning comes from. So the Shemini begins with us hearing about how God and Moshe prepared for 7 days, because the preparation for 7 days, what made the 8th day so important. The value came from not just the building, the consecration of the Mishkan, but it was the process that came before it. This is why, by the way, the Gemara tells us that if you're someone that is, if you're between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, you can't do any sins. Why? Because you're preparing for Sukkot. When you're involved in doing something that's constantly building and growing and developing yourself, you elevate yourself to a whole new plane. You can't be distracted by the noise of life. That focus, the journey, is what allows us to get to the destination. Okay, that's like the first part of the Parsha. And that's like a little bit of an introduction. And the second part of the Parsha deals with the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. This is a very tragic story, very difficult to understand. And I'm going to do my best to try my hardest to give this over in a way that is meaningful. And I think the only way to do this is to look at the text over here. Okay, so those of you that don't know, Aharon had 4 children. Okay, Nadav and Avihu were his oldest 2. Parsha begins as follows. I'm going to read this to you. I'll translate it for you. Let's do this together because it's fascinating. You learn so much here about how to deal with tragedy, about life, about people, about parenting. Endless lessons over here. I'm going to try to unpack as much of it as I can for you. Okay, so the Torah starts as follows. Vikhu Bnei Aharon Nadav ve'Avihu ish machtato. This is in chapter 10, verse 1. Okay, Vayikra, Leviticus. And Nadav and Avihu's sons each took a pan. Okay, v'yidnu bahen esh, and they put inside of it fire. V'yasimu aleha ktoret, and they placed inside of it the incense, the ktoret. V'yikruvu l'fnei Hashem esh zara asher lo tziva otam, and they brought a fire before God, which God had not commanded. Okay, so basically all we know right now is that you have the 2 sons of Aharon. These are 2 of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people. They're offering some sort of a sacrifice. okay, that was not commanded, okay, not so terrible. They're doing it on their own volition, okay, and that's they bring a strange fire, it says. Okay, v'tetzeh esh, next pasuk, v'tetzeh esh m'lifnei Hashem, and a fire went forth from before God, v'tochal otam, and it consumed them, v'yamutu l'fnei Hashem, and they died before God. Whoa. Okay, so we went from one pasuk where, okay, the two sons of Aaron are bringing an unsanctioned, incense offering, which is they're not even doing shechita. We're talking about burning some flour, okay, burning some spices. Okay, we're not talking about whether or not how you cut the animal with the blood, kosher or not kosher. This is the simplest possible act that you could be involved in the Mishkan. Okay, this is inauguration day. This is day one, and they are bringing forth a fire that they were not supposed to. And God kills them, burns them. Midrash says a fire came out from the actual Torah and went up their nostrils and literally short-circuited them, blew their souls out. Okay, very intense, very graphic. Okay, so my question is, why? Why do they deserve such an intense punishment? I can understand that, okay, fine, they did something that was a mistake. They didn't offer to make a bracha properly, maybe at their level. Maybe they did a shechita, they didn't do the proper sacrifice, but they did everything they're supposed to do. The only difference is this is unsanctioned. They brought a strange fire. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to come back to it. Vayomer Moshe, next pasuk Gimel. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon. Moshe says to Aharon, Hu asher diber Hashem, this is what God spoke. B'kirvai ekadesh v'al pnei kol ha'am ekabed. Right? I will be sanctified through those near to me, and before all the people I will be glorified. V'yidom Aharon, and Aharon was silent. Now, this is all in chronological order. So first pasuk is that they bring a strange fire. Second pasuk is they die. Third pasuk is Moshe comes out and says, hey guys, hey Aharon, I want you to know that God is said that the people that die, the people that are closest to me, are sanctified, and through them I'll be glorified, meaning that your sons were really great people. Okay, so now, what was Moshe thinking? Like, he just saw his two nephews dead, they died, okay, and now you're going to say that don't, Moshe, just know that your sons were holy. And then what was Aharon's response? Vayidom Aharon, and Aharon was silent. Was that Aharon being afraid to speak because he was afraid that maybe the fire would kill him? Was this Aharon afraid to speak because Moshe, the greatest leader in the world, just said something and therefore he's not in a position to speak? What is going on here? And then afterwards Aharon calls, Pasuk Daleh, Vayikra Moshe, El Mishael ve'el El Tzafon b'nei Uziel, Dod Aharon, Ve'yomer Alehem Kruvu Usu'u et Achechem, go out and bury, I want you to bury the children. And then after this, we hear about how they bury them, and then you have Elazar and Tamar, the two remaining sons of Aharon. Okay, they're going ahead and they're told about how to mourn and so on and so forth, and how to make sure they don't die, and how to come into the Mishkan. We learn about the laws of a Kohen not being intoxicated, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's go back now. That is this particular chapter 10, and let's try to understand what we can learn from this. So, at the very least, you can say, you know what, they died because they did something they weren't supposed to. But wouldn't you agree that, spontaneous service could be a good thing? Who here doesn't want their spouse to do something spontaneous for them? I know I do. I don't want to have to tell everyone to do something. And now I'm going to ask you the famous question that the Gemara asks. Is it better to do something because you were commanded to do it, or because you just want to do it of your own volition, the same way that Nadav and Avihu did over here? And the Gemara says, Gadol ha-mitzuveh mishe'en mitzuveh. One who is greater is the one that is commanded versus the one that is not commanded. And the question is why? Why is it better when I tell my kid to clean up the room versus him taking his own initiative? It's a good question, right? So I think the answer to this particular Gemara, and maybe it'll help us understand a little bit of this pasuk, is as follows. This is inauguration day in the Mishkan. It's all about rules. And some people say that the reason why Aaron's children died is they had it coming. Moshe even says it in the pasuk, when he says, Asher diber Hashem lemor b'kervei HaKadesh. Rashi says over there that they died. I knew two people were going to die today. I thought Aharon And Moshe says, I thought me and you, Aharon, were going to die today. I thought we were going to die today. But the reason why your children died is because they were greater. But one midrash says the reason why they died is simply because they didn't have children. They thought they were too great. They were very lofty. Another reason they may have died is because they were intoxicated, as you hear in the Pesukim. They were morel halacha b'fnei rabo. They taught halacha. They disobeyed their rabbi. But everyone will agree. The simple pasuk simply says they did something they were not supposed to do. When you're in the army, okay, and you're in a unit, you can't go ahead and perform something on your own because you want to do it. There is no room for that level of independence. There's only interdependence. And the interdependence depends on our ability to follow the rules. This is true in a family. The families have all kinds of rules and regulations. And while it's beautiful for someone to go ahead and do something on their own volition, but maybe the reason why your kid is cleaning up the room right now is because he doesn't want to do his homework, right? But you told him to do the homework and he's going in and cleaning up his room. The idea here is like this. Aharon and Moshe understood one thing, that God created a world where no man could see his face. There are limits of our ability to connect to the infinite. There's a limit to how highly elevated you and I can ever achieve. There's limits to how close we could get to God. But the only way you and I can get to God is if we follow the system. If we make up our own rules. If you decide that, I'm going to go ahead and use narcotics or hallucinogenics as a way of connecting to spirituality, which people have told me about this, asked me if I want to come on a trip with them. And I tell them it's all about preparation. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. How we get there is so important. And how they got here is so important. They offered a sacrifice which was not sanctioned, period, in a space that represents the highest level of Kedusha, of holiness. They brought a strange fire, and they're killed by fire. They literally blew their own circuits out, simply because they did not do what God wanted. They did what they wanted. And when your ego gets in the way of spirituality, when your ego gets in the way of any relationship, it actually diminishes that relationship. It makes it smaller. Are we able to let go of what we want and provide what the other needs? This is a lacking. Maybe this is why they didn't get married. Maybe this is why they didn't have children. Because it was only about themselves. They were so stuck in their own narcissistic worldview. And then how do we deal over here with Aharon's response? Vayidom Aharon. He couldn't say anything. He was just speechless. Was he just afraid? What does it mean? How do we understand Aharon's silence? When we were in Israel a few months ago, right after October 7th, we met with this man, an Israeli, whose job it is to tell the families that they lost a child. His job is they don't do phone calls in Israel. God forbid, when a soldier dies, they do house visits. So his job was to go ahead and go to the families and let them know, by the way, we got the bad news, your son or your daughter, God forbid, is dead. So I asked him, I said, what do you say? How do you, is there any training in the army about how to give such horrible news to family? And he quoted this pasuk to me, Vayidom Aharon. He's like, we say the news and we just sit there with them, we just remain silent. There are no words. Sometimes there are no words. And maybe this is a response to Moshe. Moshe is saying, hey, by the way, just know that your children died. It's horrible that they died, but they were sanctified because they were close to God. And Aharon saying, I'm staying silent because now's not the time for words, Moshe. Now's not the time to make me feel good about what may have happened. Right now is the time for me to accept whatever God has given me, but I'm remaining silent. I am not saying anything right now. I'm gonna be in a place where I can mourn inside because my children were so beloved to me. I don't want to. Don't give me words. Right? Don't tell me what you want. Don't cheer me up right now. Now is not the time to cheer someone up. When someone is dealing with something profoundly difficult, the only thing you can do in that moment is just be there for them, hold them, listen. oh, your son was so great, this and that. No, Moshe, Aharon saying that's not the response. The response, the tragedy, is to remain silent. It doesn't mean you're indifferent. We're not talking about it. It wasn't that he had no expression on his face, right? Because some Chazal would say like this. It says, the question is, maybe Aharon was silent, but maybe he was grieved on his face. Maybe he just was really sad. And the Chafetz Chaim says no, that the expression on his face was completely stonewalled. No expression on his face. And he says the word vayidom, he argues, is related to the word domem. A domem is an inanimate object. His face was like a rock, okay, lacking any hint of any kind of expression, right? So are we not supposed to go ahead and show any kind of emotion? What's going on over here? Rashi tells us, he quotes the Gemara, that Aharon was rewarded for his silence, right? And the question is, why was his silence rewarded here? Why couldn't Aharon cry out? Why was he in mourning? So Harashbam says that Aaron's silence was not telling us that one should demonstrate emotion for the loss of someone that they love, but rather this is a one-time exception in history that required a higher level, maybe even a human level of self-control. This was a special test that Aharon was going through. Aharon thought that he was going to die because of the Chet Ego. He thought that maybe he was being punished for the Chet Ego, right? But I think this was his unique way of dealing with the lost, right? Aharon rejects the idea that that this was a time to hear about the great lofty level, but rather his silence was a way of him accepting God's justice, recognizing that everything that happens at the end from God, and I can't understand it. You can't understand the pain. I'm dealing with so many situations of so much pain all the time. I can't make sense of it. I can only tell you that each of us has a role to play in this world, and that what God wants is for us to play our role as best as we can. I believe that Torah, mitzvot, the commandments, the rules give us the ability of tapping into the highest version of ourselves, giving us the ability to tap into the truest parts of who you and I are meant to be. Aharon is playing his part perfectly here. His response, the ultimate response, is silence over here. I'm not saying that should be my response and your response. Our roles are very different. But no question, the question we need to walk away with from Perashat Shemini is, are we playing our parts correctly, or is it our ego? Because when ego gets in the way, be careful, a strange fire may come out and burn us. May we be blessed with the clarity to recognize and have the strength to overcome the circumstance that we find ourselves in. Let us not allow our egos to get in the way of doing what we need to do so that we can serve the people around us in the most beautiful and the most profound of ways, so that maybe you and I could also reach a level of Aharon, reaching the level of a Rodev Shalom and Ohev Shalom, someone who's deeply in love with God, deeply in love with the service of God, deeply in love of doing what God wants so that he can express the best of himself in this world that all too often is dark. But we know that that light and that greatness comes from our action of doing what it is that we're meant to be doing. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'll take questions because I know this was a hard class. Any questions on any of the ideas? Shabbat Shalom Evarach. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.